Hello and welcome to the third and final, actually the fourth if you're counting the introduction episode of Yap and Cap's economic podcast. I'm Mr. Yap and I'm here alone today, and I'm going to talk about the final topic in IB economics that we haven't covered yet, which is global economics, or the global economy as the IB likes to call it. Specifically, I'll be looking at dumping and tariffs. So first, let's define what dumping is and what tariffs are. Dumping is the selling of goods or exports in international markets at a price lower than the average cost of production. This means that the products are sold for less than what it costs to make them. A tariff, or an anti-dumping tariff specifically, is a tariff imposed by a country to where products are imported on goods being imported by another country to raise the price of those imports back to where they would be without dumping, meaning back to the average, back above the average cost of production. Anti-dumping tariffs are said to restore equity in the global economy because it's considered unfair trade practice to sell products at a lower price than it costs to make them, with the long-term strategy of harming industries in other countries for your own benefit. So because the tariffs minimize that, it's said to increase equity in the global economy. However, it can cause allocative inefficiency in the global economy because the firms that are able to sell below the average cost of production are more efficient than those who can't. So the tariffs, although they restore equity, they can cause allocative inefficiency in the global economy, which is a theoretical downside, but that's not really considered usually. The specific example that I am going to look at with you today is a trade war between China and Taiwan. There's a lot of political tension between China and Taiwan currently, but I'll look at the trade war going on right now, or at least a part of it, which is going to be my specific example. But first I'll mention an example that's probably better known and that you will have heard or will hear about in your economics classes from your teacher, definitely, and that is China's dumping of steel into the global economy. China's government is said to be subsidizing their steel industry pretty heavily in order to sell steel at below the average cost of production. And the idea is that in the long term, what the Chinese government is trying to achieve is a monopoly in the steel market, or something close to a monopoly, because as they sell below the cost of production, steel producers in other countries will go out of business because they are not receiving the same level of subsidies, so they can't compete and people won't buy from them anymore, so they'll go out of business. And as that happens, the only producers left in the global economy producing steel will be the Chinese producers. And then at that point, the Chinese government will be able to even remove the subsidies that it gives to steel producers, and steel producers will be able to raise the prices of steel pretty much as they want, because no one will be able to buy steel elsewhere because they'll have a monopoly. But that's been going on for like years, so that's not really a relevant example now, or it's not a recent example that you can use, for example, in uh, in some of your work that you do in your IAs and stuff like that. More recent example, however, that you can use would be, for example, uh, things in the Taiwan-China trade war. For example, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce alleged that that Taiwan was dumping polycarbonate products, which are just plastics, uh, into China, which means that they judged that Taiwan was subsidizing its polycarbonate producers to an extent at which they could then sell their plastics at a lower price than they cost to produce, and that was harming China's economy, China's industry for making plastics. And because plastics play such a big role in China's economy and in their exports, which are largely like electronics and plastic products, that's a pretty big threat to China, because if they lost their own plastic industry, then they'd be reliant on other economies, and those could then raise the price of plastics and harm the Chinese economy pretty significantly. So as a countermeasure, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce decided that they're going to impose anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese polycarbonate imports, and those should in theory raise the price of polycarbonates back up to where they would be without the dumping, and that would restore equity. And yeah, it would counteract the effects of the dumping fully, and it would increase China's government revenue from the tariffs that they would receive. And yeah, in theory, that should restore equity. However, it's debated whether or not that's true, because of the political conflicts between the two countries. It's hard to say whether or not the judgment that dumping is occurring is an actual judgment, or whether it's just a cover up for a political move of just being harder on Taiwan in terms of their economic policies. And yeah, Taiwan's retaliating as well, with Taiwan's Ministry of Finance imposing tariffs on Chinese products such as bath towels, pillow covers, napkins, tablecloths, foot pads, and semi-finished products, for example. So there seems to be going like a back and forth of tariffs, and the two countries trying to harm each other's economies. So ultimately, it depends on whether or not dumping's actually occurring. You need to know if dumping's actually occurring to know whether or not they're trying to restore equity, or whether it's just a trade war, which is just caused by political conflicts. Yeah, and if dumping is actually occurring, then that's an unfair trade practice. And on a diagram, actually, that would look like the perfectly elastic world supply, or Taiwanese imports into China being moved downwards as their price is reduced, and that would increase the quantity imported, and a tariff would move that right back up to where it was, and that difference would then become extra revenue for the Chinese government. So yeah, hopefully you can find some examples on that. That's a pretty recent example from 2023, and it's pretty easy to find examples like this in the global economy in that topic. I would strongly recommend looking at dumping in tariffs for your IA, because you can just look up on Google dumping tariffs and just see what's going on recently in the global economy, and see where there's tariffs being imposed to counteract dumping. And there's always different angles you can look at it, and you can try to make a judgment about whether or not that's a good idea, which usually it is if the dumping is occurring, which it doesn't necessarily have to be, because of, like in my example, it could just be a political conflict causing it. Okay, well, thanks for listening, and yeah, that's it.